Be the Talk, episode 144, featuring Susana Rinderle. Welcome to Be the Talk. We go behind the talk 7 days a week for tips and techniques to help you change the world. I'm Nathan Eckel, and a talker myself. I'm interviewing others who change the world with their talk. You can too, even if you've never given a talk before. Let's get started with today's show. We are live with Susana Rinderle. Susana, are you ready to talk?
I am, Nathan.
Susana Rinderle is a speaker, coach, author, and president of Susana Rinderle Consulting, LLC. Based in Los Angeles with 25 years of multi-industry international experience, Susana helps leaders and organizations solve a pressing problem or go from good to great through the science of inclusive leadership. Susana Rinderle, welcome to the talk.
Thanks for having me, Nathan.
It's my pleasure, and your talk was called Diversity is Necessary for Human Evolution. You had some great points. I think my favorite point of the 3 points that you made, Susana, is that bias isn't bad. You can explain that because obviously it doesn't stop there, but I just love the really, if I can say this, inclusive way that you talked about inclusivity. I just thought it was common sense. My walls came down, and I really felt like I was able to absorb what you were talking about. So thank you, and take us behind the talk.
You're welcome, Nathan, and thanks for that feedback, because that lets me know that the impact was what I intended. Because one of the things that I've learned in my 25 years of experience in the field is that where we get stuck around this conversation, and by the way, this talk was from mid-2012, almost 6 years ago, and it's even more relevant today to talk about the fact that the guilt and shame that often surrounds this topic is definitely something that needs to be examined and healed, but usually gets in the way of having an effective conversation. And so approaching it from brain science, now that we have the science that allows us to look at the human brain while the human is still alive, we're learning all kinds of interesting things about how we actually operate and behave, which goes counter to what we thought. You know, our intentions don't always have their intended impacts, for example. And so I'm really glad that point you brought out was one that stuck with you, because those are one of the 3 main points of the talk, which is that biases aren't bad. They're how the human brain works. We are judgment and decision-making machines. It's not that the judgment or the decisions are bad. If we didn't have that way of processing vast amounts of information very quickly, we'd be mobilized before we even got out of bed in the morning. It's that we make decisions quickly based on limited to no information. And we have evolved to make very quick decisions using what I call our downstairs brain, our ancient brain that does this outside of our awareness and permission about other members of our species, and then act on those behaviors without even realizing it. So bias isn't bad, it's just how the human brain works. It's helped keep us alive for tens of thousands of years and still does, but can interfere with making the best decisions and doing the best behavior. And everybody, one of the things that's interesting about humans too is that we've all had the experience of being different than other humans. In fact, we are designed so that our nervous systems activate when we feel excluded from other humans, because that was essential to our survival. But not all those ways that we're different are treated equally. And so that's something that we often don't realize. And yet the third thing is that it's exactly our biases that enables us to be as brilliant as we are as a species. So the fact that I have a part of my brain that's constantly and unconsciously shifting to pick up on 40 different discrete pieces of information every second means that the more different you are from me, the higher the probability you're picking up on a somewhat different 40. So a diverse group has a bigger brain than a non-diverse group. And we now have evidence from hard sciences like mathematics and economics that show that non-diverse groups outperform individuals, from diverse groups outperform individuals, non-diverse groups, and even a group is best in some cases, but only if there's inclusiveness, only if those differences are effectively managed and there's positive relationships and effective communication. And so doing diversity you shouldn't just do it because it's the right thing to do or a moral obligation. That's a value set that I possess, but you don't need to have those values to get the better results that diversity gets you. And so it's the evolutionary advantage that diversity gets us. That's the imperative for doing it, even though it's not how we evolved. We didn't evolve to interact across differences, but we must, because not only is the world that way, especially now in large metropolitan areas, but it gets us better results. That's the real new school way to do diversity, is because it gets us better results.
Well, and Susana, what I love about your approach to this is you're able to really flesh these things out, and you're able to do it in a way that really kind of validates our natural wiring and really lowers our defenses so that we can then change the gray area parts that really need to be changed. Really, all of us need to change. We all need to be willing to have this conversation. And it's probably a conversation in which we all have to adjust. We all have to compromise. We all have to admit a certain amount of bias or privilege or whatever. But I love that you don't lead with some of those some of that languaging. Instead, you lead with the scientific reasoning and justification for bias as per our human evolution. So first off, thanks for doing that. Second off, and I probably should have mentioned this to Talk Universe already, Susana is calling in. We were able to catch her, and she's in transit today. So there is a whole lot of squeaking going on. Don't worry about that because the content is amazing. Now, Susana, with anybody else, this would be a little bit of a gotcha question, a little current event. You're mentioning large metropolitan areas. I live right outside of Philadelphia, and we had a little bit of an incident that you may be bringing to mind. I would love to hear your advice to Starbucks, because they're going to be shutting down their stores in a week or two to try to train them in some of the bias and the incidents that happened, and they're really trying to do the right thing. What is your take on it, and what would be your advice? Because this isn't isolated. If it's happening in Starbucks, which tries to be one of the most unbiased, inclusive, open places, it can happen anywhere. So I'd love if you're willing to speak to that. I think you would have some really great advice to say.
Thanks. And I could do a whole show just on this topic. But and I appreciate the invitation to speak on this, because it is very current, especially in your immediate geography. I wrote an entire piece on this for Workforce Magazine that folks can read. But I think my main two to three main points would be Starbucks has done a lot right as a company. Their top leaders also said a lot of very effective things in the wake of the incident where two African-American men, the manager called 911 because they had not purchased anything, and the police came and actually arrested those gentlemen. I believe they just recently are having a settlement, got a settlement. But I think that the closing all of the stores on May 29th and 175,000 employees to a half-day racial bias training and lose up to $187 million of revenue is a great example of good intentions and effective impact. This is not going to move the needle. There's a couple reasons why. Number one, you can't, what your downstairs brain does in a 4-hour training, partly because you need to have the systems and processes in place to either remove the triggers that create bias, or to ensure that we're constantly being reinforced and hardwired with the behaviors that we learn in training. Second thing is that Starbucks has about a 15% turnover rate every year. So let's say that all of this training was effective. They also have everything in place in their culture to make sure that the behaviors are reinforced constantly and followed up on. Their workforce is turning over at a rate of 15%. In a few years, it's going to be a completely different set of employees. The third thing is that when you embark on this kind of intervention with your employees, you want to bring in experts that have the expertise you need. I don't know anyone that would ask a foot person to do their taxes or an accountant to operate on their foot, but that's essentially what Starbucks has done in terms of the folks that they are engaging with to bring in the training. Not one of them has expertise in adult learning, training and development, organizational development, process improvement, or any of the fields that you need to really get to the bottom of what caused the problem in the first place and what will solve it. Because as a person with an organizational development background, not just training, my first questions with the situation were, what was the policy in place? Did the manager follow the policy or not? If not, what was the breakdown there? It might not be, investing this much time and money in training might not also make a difference because there's a breakdown in their process and policy.
So, it might be as simple as a policy. Like
what was going on? Yeah, what was going on in the store that merited a call to the emergency 911 line? And also on the side of the police, why was there not a question asked in triage in terms of whether it really merited emergency response? When the police came and they questioned the gentleman for 10 minutes, why was a question to the manager not asked in terms of what is your policy in the store? Of course, police can't possibly know the policy in any store they go into. That's one of the things that the cops said. But in a 10-minute questioning, it makes a lot of sense that part of that would be, so manager, what is your policy here in the store? There's all these other people sitting around not buying anything. That's not hard to do. So it's little systems and processes, things like that can remove the trigger that tends to fill in the gap when we don't have clarity or structure as humans.
We are enjoying a very timely, relevant conversation on diversity issues with Susana Rinderle. Her talk from 2012 is called Diversity is Necessary for Human Evolution. And that talk and the issues around that talk, I think, to be fair to say, have evolved a great deal in the last 5 to 6 years in the field that is always evolving. We're going to be right back in just a moment with the Blitz Round. People ask, how could I start a 7-day-a-week podcast? It's because of what I've learned from my mentors. Some of the best mentors in history aren't around anymore. They've left hours of one-on-one mentoring behind in their books. Each month at Classics on Tap, I record a new chapter from a classic business book to help you make a difference. Download your first chapter at classicsontap.com. And we're back with Susana Rinderle. It is time for the Blitz Round. Are you ready?
I am ready, Nathan.
Here's question number 1. I'm going to ask you a series of either-or questions related to the preparation and performance of your talk. Question number 1, were you selected or did you apply to speak?
Both. TEDx Albuquerque is one of the oldest TEDx's in the world, and at the time, largest and most competitive. So there was a competitive application process of over 100 applicants, and I was one of, I believe, 12 that was selected.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So are you a memorizer, an improviser, or a blender?
Oh, that's such a great question. I am most effective as a speaker by having down my, as you've heard in this interview, my statistics and my general ideas, but then just speaking extemporaneously off the cuff. In TEDx Albuquerque, again, they have very high standards, and they required all of their speakers to be completely off book, completely memorized, but also staying within the required TEDx time. So I had to really flex my preferred style and memorize, but still do it extemporaneously in style.
So it sounds like a blender to me, with majority on the memorizing. Major blender. All right.
Not my preference, but that's what happened. Yeah.
Did you have nerves, or were you in the zone, or neither, or both?
Yeah, Nathan, I was so nervous going up to the talk and planning it because I knew that memorization was a requirement, and I had not had a good experience with memorization. I had one particularly traumatic experience as a child. I was a classically trained pianist, and there was one incident when I was about 8 when I completely forgot my piece during a competition in front of the entire audience. And so that was my last reference point for memorization. And a lot of people don't know this, but the TEDx talk that you see online today is actually a recreation because there was a problem with the audio. So that was actually recreated in the studio.
Oh my!
Well, you can see the full talk with the fuzzy audio on my YouTube channel. And what you'll notice towards the end is that there's this dramatic pause right before I think my second to last point. And you can't tell, but I actually completely blanked out at that point. And I just kind of breathed and went, sent a prayer up to the universe, and it came back, and it came across as this like very well-timed pause. But what actually happened was I had completely blanked out.
Like a boss. You own that pause.
Yeah. Hashtag like a boss. Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, that you just answered the next question. What's a tip, technique, or tool that helped you? It might be owning the pause, Talk Universe. But besides that, what would you say?
Besides that, dancing salsa with one of my other speakers backstage right before I went on.
Nice.
I kid you not. And I had prepared a brief playlist on my iPod right before and listened to that really loud and did a couple wall push-ups to get rid of the energy. So yeah, then this is a group of 800 in one of Albuquerque's largest venues. So it was super high pressure. But yeah, definitely wall push-ups, music, salsa, and just giving it up to life, the universe, or God that whatever you're going to say is perfect, even if it's not what you planned.
So I call that the Michael Phelps meme school of preparation. I don't know if you've ever seen that meme of him at the last Olympics listening to, like, I don't know if it was death metal or whatever, but he's got his iPods in there. Gangsta rap, yeah. And he's got this look. He's got this murderous look on his face because he's really about to murder another world record, basically. So I've had speakers that I spoke with, and they were getting in the zone in a similar way. Now it's a performance, Susana. So what was the most unexpected, strange, or just plain weird thing that happened during or right before your talk?
Wow. That's a great question. I can't think of anything weird or unexpected other than the fact that I blanked out right towards the end. But I guess what was a surprise in a good way was just the positive energy of the audience. Like, they really were engaged. They really were, even though they were silent for most of it, the energy was really engaging, and they laughed more than I thought they would at certain points. Not that I had given that much thought, but I definitely felt like we were going on a journey together, and that was really enriching, and maybe what allowed me to come back to my point at the end.
We've been enjoying a really poignant talk with Susana Rinderle, and her talk is called Diversity is Necessary for Human Evolution. You can see that talk by going to our notes page at BeTheTalk.com as well. You can connect with Susana at her website. We'll have a link for you to do that as well. And we're going to come right back in a moment to Susana for the final word of advice for Talk Universe. Everyone wants to change the world, but not everyone knows the first step. Before you can change the world with your talk, it has to be selected. So grab the templates, timelines, and tools that I use to get my talk selected at BeTheTalk.com. We're back with you, Talk Universe, and it's time for the final word of advice with Susana Rinderle. What do you say, Susana?
I would say that if life or the TEDx committee have brought you to a point where you're going to be on that stage, just trust that you're there for a reason, and that there are people that need to hear exactly what you have to say, and that you're the only person that can say it. Just trust that. Let go of the idea of it being perfect, or that you will say the right thing for everyone on the audience, but just trusting that you're there for a reason, you have something that there are people that need to hear, that will be there to hear, and that you are the only one can say it just the way that you will.
Susana Rinderle, thanks so much for coming on the talk today and sharing your wisdom with Talk Universe.
Well, it's been my pleasure, Nathan. Thank you for the invitation.
Thanks for listening to Be The Talk. For tips and resources to help you change the world, go to BeTheTalk.com. See you tomorrow.